Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wise Up, a finance podcast made by and for Gens Y and Z to help you be better with money. Now, coming off of the last episode with Professor James Aaron Brown, I had to figure out where to kick us off. And I'm going to do so by picking up from a research survey, really, published by Professor James Choi, Yale University, and the National Bureau of Economic Research, titled Popular Personal Finance Advice versus the Professors. Diving into the advice people get from the most popular 50 personal finance books versus general economic and academic theory. However, before we get into the content, if you're new here, do me a favor, wherever you're listening to us on, follow the channel, subscribe to it, like the video, share it with friends so we can get this out to as many people as possible. If you're a repeat listener or watcher, do me a favor and do the same if you haven't already. It means the world to me, and we can keep helping everyone wise up. Now, the reason why I wanted to tackle this, the concept of these personal finance books versus academic theory, is because so many of us in the space started by reading these books. And when I had Teddy Stavetsky on 2 weeks ago, we talked about how we probably got into it by reading these books. It's a very common first step for so many people. And for a lot of people, it's the last step, too. They read a few of these books. They might tune into a show or two of, say, Dave Ramsey's. I think Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, also has a podcast. And they stop there. Most people never get into the academic world of finance and economics. And unsurprisingly, these two worlds have occasionally rather drastic disagreements, but occasionally some agreements. They approach issues from two different lenses. And similar to the ideas that I've espoused in previous episodes, I don't like taking things from a one-size-fits-all either-or approach. I'm not a fan of strict academic adherence to economic principles, but for reasons that I've also laid out in previous episodes, there are times where I'm not a fan of the traditional personal finance advice that's given. And today, I really want to dive into that. So let's get started with it. So this research paper was published by Professor Choi back on August 10th, so about a month ago. I've had time in the last few weeks to pore over it, read it, reread it, really try to analyze what's going on. And I think the biggest first step, really, for a lot of people, and the first step for me that I want to discuss with you is the issue of saving and spending. In general, most of us, when we get into this space, the first advice that we're given is, live below your means. Okay, that's fairly generic, appropriate, still quite valid. Generic advice. We build off into that. We have specific ratios about how much we should be expecting to spend on certain items. The general rule being 25% of your income should be put to your rent expenses. You should be saving 10%. Start as early as you can and go from there. And most of these personal finance books advise, generally speaking, precisely that. That's where we get these ideas from, that you should start saving a rigid amount of, say, 10%. That's actually a very common number in a lot of these books, as early as you can. That compound interest is your best friend, that time is your greatest asset, so that you should begin saving as early as possible. And this is call it a phenomenon known as savings smoothing. You smooth your savings rate, make it a constant, flat, not even a variable, but a flat rate over the duration of your lifetime, say up until or possibly even through retirement. It's fairly simple, or at least the reasoning is that you start saving as early as you can. You do that for longer than the average person does. You'll be able to retire, or at least not worry about money, quicker than the average person does. However, economic theory isn't in lockstep with that. Because economically, financially, we know that your greatest earnings years, the time periods in your life where you have the highest earnings potentials, are actually your 40s, possibly your late 30s, depending on where you're at. Most people will not be making bank, per se, as a young person entering the workforce. Most people in college or even entering the workforce don't have much income or savings coming in. So starting immediately isn't that practical for them. For the average broke college student, going back to my conversation with Teddy a couple of weeks ago, the most extravagant decision some people might have to make is what flavor of ramen seasoning they're going to use today. It's not an extravagant lifestyle by any means. But hopefully, as you get into the workforce, you spend years in it, you continue to go up the proverbial corporate ladder, or you start your own business with the experience that you've earned, your growth potential and then your savings and your earnings potential exponentially increases, almost like a hockey stick. You'd go from not making much, not being able to save much as a young person to hopefully your 30s, 40s, 50s, making a significant amount. That's generally how that works in real life, practically speaking. Yet, most of these books don't not even take it into account. A couple even directly combat the notion of fluctuating your savings and investing to fit your lifestyle. One of these sorts of people directly kind of just says, psychologically, it's not realistic. And finally, I can't get the numbers to work anyway. Then the first point we're talking about psychologically is that notion that if you've been used or accustomed to saving, spending, and investing in a certain manner for a duration of time, unlearning those habits are difficult. Kind of going back to the very old saying, can't teach an old dog new tricks. The working theory that these books have is that if you've been used to spending X amount monthly, weekly, whatever it is, on certain goods or items and only saving a certain amount, trying to increase that amount later on in life isn't practical because you are so set in your ways mentally that it becomes a struggle for you psychologically to wrap your brain around a new existence. And psychologically, that kind of makes sense. And that's probably why this practice, this advice, has been able to sustain itself for as long as it has, because it's a very psychologically appealing concept. People don't have to unlearn or learn anything new. They can just start doing something now, and if they can be consistent with it, it becomes a practice. Woohoo, 10, 20 years down the line, it's second nature to them, almost like breathing or eating. It makes sense. However, again, that's psychologically it makes sense. Economically, it doesn't. Economically, it makes absolutely no sense, because we know that early on in life, you're not making much, if anything. The best way that I can illustrate this point to you is to, again, goes back to those generic, let's call them, arbitrary set numbers that are thrown at people, that you should be spending no more than 25% of your income on rent. Now, there are some discrepancies depending on who you ask if that 25% number is your after-tax income, your before-tax income. For ease, I'm just going to say it's the before-tax income, because if we're doing after-tax, then my example gets even worse for people. According to the most recent data that we have for Q2 of 2022, so the most recent economic quarter that ended in this past June, the median salary in the U.S., the average salary in the U.S., was $1,041 per week, or $54,132 per year. That is how much the average person is making annually, as of the most recent data. Roughly speaking, and I did the math, if we take that 25% number and we kind of crossed it around, we would then find, and I'll pull up the exact number for you here, we would find that your rent expense should be no more than $13,533 annually, which is a little over $1,000 a month. Yeah, let's say around $1,100 a month. Do you want to know what the average rent is as of July of 2022, so roughly the exact same time period that we're looking at now? The average rent, according to rent.com, their research, for a one-bedroom apartment, not a two-bedroom, not a three-bedroom, not a home, for a one-bedroom is $1,770. Annually, what that equates to is $21,240 towards rent. So if you recall that in order to get that 25% rule of what your rent should be, this number is about 57% above what it should be. I think the exact math is about 56.98, 56.99% higher, but I rounded for you. It don't work practically. In theory, it's great to say that you should be spending no more than a quarter of your income on rent. However, practically, we'll look at the real world, that's not working. If you want a one-bedroom, it'll set you back 57% more than you should be spending to fit in these parameters that people are laying out for you in these books. Let's say you wanted a two-bedroom. A two-bedroom, on average, will set you back $2,100. Split down the middle, let's assume you got a roommate, it's $1,050. Woohoo! You are now finally in that 25% rule, let's call it. But again, now you found a two-bedroom apartment and you found a roommate. Things get slightly more difficult for you. If you want to live on your own, these rules go out the window. Absolutely. And mind you, this is just what the apartment costs. For anyone who lives in an apartment, you understand that there are plenty more fees besides that. You know, your water, your electricity, your trash, your gas if you have it, depending on the apartment complex, other security fees, whatever it might be. Those might easily cost you another $100, $200 a month. If we are taking into account the cost of the apartment plus utilities, which will probably be the overall rent payment that's due, you're talking about a significantly higher amount. So realistically, including utilities, the average one bedroom is probably going for around $1,900 a month. The average two bedroom probably closer to $2,200, $2,250. These principles don't work. They work psychologically. They give you very simple theories to apply. Of 25% should be my aim. Again, this is the average income and the average apartment. However, there are two very different things. Incomes, as I said, usually increase with age. Apartments don't increase with age. The cost of a one-bedroom apartment, generally, the newer it is, more expensive it will be, not the older. So if you are a new college grad entering the workforce, your median salary will probably be less than that. Probably. Again, we're assuming since that is the median salary in America today. But your rent will probably be that. Like, that is how that distribution works. You are nearly guaranteed to have a salary lower than that if you are in your late teens, early 20s. But reasonably guaranteed to see a rent cost precisely that. So this equation is even worse for you. And again, this is me doing the median salary before taxes. If we're doing after taxes, oh boy, your before tax income is going to have to be a lot higher. And that's where it gets even worse for you. It's just not possible. If you are someone who is new to the workforce, you're in an underserved community, you're in the lower class, these arbitrarily set hypothetical numbers of 25% to rent, 10% to savings aren't applicable. They just aren't. Because for that person who is making exponentially more because they're in their 40s, their median salary is, I don't know, $70,000, $80,000. Again, they're still paying for that one-bedroom apartment going for $1,770, but their income is also higher. The food that you're buying is the same price for you as it is for them. However, the overall percentage cost that it is to you is much higher than it is for them. So it makes sense that they can afford to save and invest more because they are making more. If you are at the beginning of your life cycle or your work cycle, you shouldn't have that flat savings rate. Absolutely not. It makes no sense. Outside of the psychological influence that it has, outside of the psychological ease or attractiveness that it has, it makes sense emotionally. Does it make sense practically? And second off, let's just talk about the whole point of living life. Let's do that for a second. There's a famous Dave Ramsey quote, which I might butcher in this moment, but it goes roughly to the effect of, if you have any credit card debt, the only time that you should see the inside of a restaurant is when you are working in it. What if I just want to enjoy my life? Like, real question. And I brought this up a couple of weeks ago. If going out, to a diner, a restaurant, whatever it is, a bar, to grab drinks or food once a week as a interlude, let's call it, as a break from the day-to-day of your job, your life, whatever it is, and it gives you a reprieve, it lets you collect yourself, it gives you joy, do it. Don't force yourself into being miserable, again, especially if you're someone who's in that lower stage of life, either because they're just entering the workforce or because they are just in the lower economic brackets. Again, I can agree with the general cost of not wasting money on nonsense. I did a whole 2-part series last week about how most luxury goods are scams. I'm fine with that advice of not spending wastefully. But spending on things that give you joy or at minimum give you a reprieve from the day-to-day struggle of life, do it. Find something that gives you joy. And I think it's something that so many of us miss, or at least so many of these finance books miss. See, they focus so much on starting early, on investing early and often, on compound interest, the eighth wonder of the world. They look past living. And I say this, again, as someone who's hosting a personal finance and investing podcast. Yes, I recommend you live below your means. I recommend you budget. I recommend that you don't waste money on things. I recommend that you invest. But I'm not going to be condescending and belittle you for wanting to enjoy life while you are still living it. With all due respect to the people who prescribe saving till the day you die, that money will not show up in your coffin. This isn't ancient Egypt. We don't believe that you'll be buried with all of your worldly possessions and they'll be used and join you in the world to come. We don't do that here. Enjoy the life that you have. And yes, the goal of saving and investing properly, early, often, whatever it is to hopefully get to a point where you can travel, go to excursions, concerts, whatever that might be for you, sooner than the average person. But we usually do it at the expense of the other. See, again, if you are someone who is in that lower tax bracket, either by choice or because you just entered the workforce, or by nature of the fact that you're just in the lower economic classes, you didn't have access to a school, to a trade school, to resources that would allow you to escape those. Finding joy in life can be hard. Again, that's why in the series last week, I discussed how a lot of people in the lower economic brackets spend so much money on luxury goods. They want to feel, or at least look like they're part of the rest of the world. They want to look like they have value. Because again, unfortunately in society, we associate so much of our personal value to our economic values, or at least our ability to create economic value. If you're someone who is struggling to get through today, saving for tomorrow is nonsense. Respectfully. I got my certificate in pro bono financial planning back in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And during the process of getting that certificate, working with the Financial Planning Association, part of the curriculum is understanding that most of the people who are in these underserved communities, investing isn't on par for them. They're just trying to figure out how to get through today, maybe this week at best, at most the month if they're lucky. They're trying to figure out how to put food on the table, how to keep the lights on, how to keep the water running. And you're talking about investing 10% of your annual income, your monthly income, your weekly income. Bro, take a step back, get your head out of your rear end, and look at the real world. If the average person today cannot afford to live in a one-bedroom apartment without getting a roommate, someone physically living in that room with them, or trying to find other roommates to live in a larger apartment, what the hell are you thinking they're going to have the ability to properly invest and save? I'm trying to be realistic here. Set expectations accordingly. Look at the world and then take a step back. Humble yourself. Telling people arbitrarily they need to save 10% consistently from the day they read your book is nonsense. If they're struggling to get through their day-to-day, they should worry about getting through their day-to-day. Hopefully, God willing, they get through their day-to-day, get to a point where they can actually focus on retirement, luxury goods, items, travel, whatever the hell it is. But let's cross that bridge when we get there, shall we? The average person isn't there yet. They need to focus on actually just getting by. Placing these limits on them arbitrarily of save this much. Regardless, it's nonsense. So economically speaking, when you're young, when you're just starting out, you're in those lower economic brackets and you're trying to move up, your savings rates probably be either very low or negative. And honest to God, fine. If that means that you get to actually go through life and do those small things that bring you joy, God bless. We'll talk to you about investing and saving, in a more immediate sense once you get to the point where you're able to. We'll still educate you about the best practices now. But I'm going to understand that you're probably not at that stage of your life where you can. See, and beyond that, we've discussed, I did this with Professor James Aaron Brown on Wednesday, I've done this a couple of times. A lot of people today value experiences over items. Or at least, hopefully we should. If you're at that point where you're being told, no, you need to save insert amount. But, there's a buddy that you haven't seen in a couple of weeks as you've both been busy working. They want to grab drinks, catch up. They want to go to Starbucks and talk. Freaking hell, go. Spend $6 on a coffee and talk to your friend that you haven't seen in a couple of weeks. If your buddies that have been busy for a bit, want to go to Topgolf or go axe throwing with you, freaking go. Live life. The goal of this life is not simply exist. To go through life always looking to the future, never focusing on today. Respectfully, you're not guaranteed a tomorrow. None of us are. And that's not to promote spending wastefully, spending everything you have today and not ever saving and investing. It's to level with you honestly. We act like we're guaranteed to live to 85. When, again, the average life expectancy is actually decreasing. But we'll get to that. No, we talked about it last week. I don't have to talk about it again. You're not guaranteed anything in life. Enjoy today while you have it. Again, I'm going to quote Master Oogway, Lord Almighty. Today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. Enjoy it. Don't waste it. Don't spend so much of your life sacrificing on the altar of compound interest that when you get to the end of your life, you are rich in savings and investing, and yet so poor in memories and life experiences. That is not a punishment I would want to wish on my enemies. You have one life. You have only so much time with the people that you love. And I agree with the personal finance advice that time is your most valuable asset, but I disagree slightly on what that means and how that should be implemented. If you have the ability to see people you love, do so. You'll make the $5 back. You might not get the opportunity to see that person again. And I speak from experience. Every Thursday, I go to Buffalo Wild Wings and I watch sports. Is eating food that's deep fried going to do my life any good? No, it's very unhealthy. I know that going in. However, again, it's a reprieve for my day-to-day life. I work remotely. So going out, watching sports with people is great. It's just fun for me to do. Even if we're not talking, just being around other people, watching sports, great time. It makes the atmosphere so much greater than just watching from home. Real talk. And on the economic side of things, last night we were sitting and eating, and I heard other people at the bar who were eating talking to each other and going, listen, with the way the economy is going, we can only afford to come on days like today. Thursday, for those that don't follow, Buffalo Wild Wings has the buy one, get one boneless, and then the 50% off traditional on Tuesdays. And people at the bar are talking about how they can only really afford to go on Thursday because of what's going on economically. They can't afford to go out otherwise. And I think that's a powerful thing to understand, that people still want to have some reprieve from life, especially as things feel like they're getting bad. They're still cutting back. They're still trying to be cognizant of their savings and spending. But they also want that reprieve, that moment where they can, sit at a bar and drink shitty food or drink shitty alcohol, eat shitty food. That's bad for their health. Why? Because it brings them some semblance of just peace and happiness in life. I'm not going to shame them for that. Again, I'm doing the same thing. Fine. I think those two things can work at the same time. You can promote living below your means. You can promote financial literacy while also promoting that people live the life that they have instead of waiting for a future that may never come. An either or approach doesn't work, and it never has. Now, progressing slightly from the savings and spending aspect of things, a lot of these books also talk about investing. They give investing advice, or at least I want to say it's direct investing advice, but they talk about the best way to invest and talk about debt specifically. And there's a very interesting section in Professor Choi's article where he talks about their approaches to debt. Now, I actually found this astonishing when I read it, but reading it back, given my previous quote from Dave Ramsey, perhaps it shouldn't be too shocking to me. Now, it was about the concept of which debt you should pay off. The correct answer, I will fight anyone who says otherwise. The correct answer to this question is your high interest debt should be the first thing that you pay off. That should be a non-starter for everyone. However, 10 of the most popular 50 personal finance books do not advocate for paying off high interest debt first. They actually advocate the exact opposite, paying off your low interest debt first. And this is a practice made famous by Dave Ramsey. It's called the snowball method, where you pay off the small interest debt first and then move on to the high interest debt. And Dave Ramsey actually addresses the seemingly backwards nature of this, where he says in one of his books, quote, "People sometimes say, but Dave, doesn't it make more sense mathematically to pay off the high interest rates first? Maybe, but if you were doing math, you wouldn't have credit card debt, would you?" I will respectfully say this man is one of the most condescending authors that I have ever read. And perhaps that's why he has any appeal, because there's seemingly so many gurus that get famous by almost belittling their target audience, and it's some weird kind of sadomasochistic father figure relationship that people have, and I don't fully understand it, but fine, whatever gets you off. It's nonsense. Again, this whole thing goes back to the psychological effect of small wins, as he describes it. Continuing the quote, "This is about behavior modification. You need some quick wins or you will lose steam and get discouraged. Every time you cross a debt off the list, you get more energy and momentum." Sure, maybe, but what if, hear me out here, because of the high interest debt perhaps being applied to the highest amount of purchases, hello, the average credit card interest rate being above 21% right about now, causing your overall debt to balloon much faster than the potential money you're saving based off the lower interest rates, therefore causing you to feel even worse. I don't know. I might be completely out of line for that, but I think that makes sense. I think that, randomly prescribing for behavioral modification and for science purposes, that you prioritize low interest debt first at the expense of high interest debt is nonsense. It's backwards and dead wrong. Completely. Do not do that. And second, back to the whole point of credit card debt. So many of these personal finance books, for whatever idiotic reason, espouse this notion that all debt is bad. I swear to God, somewhere in the world, Dave Ramsey and a lot of his lackeys just perked up as I loudly diminished that viewpoint. It's nonsense. Let me explain to you how a lot of rich people continue to make their riches, and why today in the real estate market so many properties are being bought up by major investment banks. See, if someone knows, say a real estate investor, that they can get annualized returns through rent payments of, let's say, 12% of their overall investment, even a 6% mortgage rate doesn't scare them, because they're going to make an extra 6%. It's free money. They took out a loan that has a 6%, again, that's a rough number, interest rate. Then they buy a home and rent it out. People make rent payments to them that are going to be in excess, hopefully, again, if they're looking at the right properties, of what their interest payments are. And now they made money. So they borrowed money and they made money from money they did not have. It's a free money machine for them. That's what a lot of y'all miss when you just read Dave Ramsey and all these other people's advice about how all debt is bad. No, if you can use debt to make money, it's fine. The simplest way I can put this is, if you have a debt, whether that's a loan, a mortgage, whatever it is, that has an interest rate that is lower than what you would earn through your investment, take the debt. every time, because then you will make more money. Like, we've made debt such a scary word because most people don't know how to use debt. And the most common forms of debt are probably going to be in your credit cards, buying things you don't need. But accurately used, or at least effectively used in its maximal efficiency, debt is a very good way to not just get rich, but continue to stay rich. Because then you're no longer leveraging your own assets. Sure, you might put something down as collateral, depending on the size of the loan, depending on the time of the economy, whatever it is. But if you, as a general real estate investor, someone who is well off, understand that you can get 10% from your real estate investment. And interest rates, again, even now with the absurd interest rates hikes that we're seeing are at 6%. No, before this, they were at what, 3%? Y'all remember, they were extremely low before this. You're making free money. So this entire nonsense of how to use debt is idiotic. If you can utilize debt efficiently, use it. Don't be afraid of debt. Used accurately, debt is your friend. Again, this goes back to educating. Even if you can't use this right now, save it. Write it down. And hopefully one day, hopefully soon, I wish that for all of you, you are in that ability to have to worry about finding the most maximal real estate investment. It is my wish for everyone, if that is your choice. Investment against the market, whatever it is. The concept of debt being bad and shaming you for having credit card debt, it's condescending, it's arrogant, and it's just plain wrong. Do not listen to this advice. The other piece of advice that I have discussed that I disagree with is this notion that if you just magically invest in the market for like 40 years, you're fine. Your risk goes down. Doesn't matter what the economic conditions are, just invest. It's all that matters. Time in the market over timing the market. Again, I started my show with this, essentially. Why does it have to be an either or? And this was a topic of conversation that I had with Dr. Vinay Utham last week. If you have not seen that one, go watch it back. That is, Dr. Vinay set a high bar for everyone else to follow. Economic conditions matter. The pricing of stocks matters. Don't buy at a high. It's nonsense. If you think the market's about to crash, don't buy. That's nonsense. And this is discussed in Professor Choi's write-up. It's a very interesting paper for those that have the capacity to read it. Officially, it's 30 pages long, but the last 7 pages are references and tables, so it's really only about 20 or 21 pages. Now, there's a section about asset allocations, equities, all of the other fun things, and they discuss this entire notion of the more time you spend in the market, the more your risk goes down. And there is some truth to it, but there's also some lack of truth to it. Allow me to address the lack of truth. See, the reasoning that a lot of people have is that because historically markets go up, you should be investing all the time. That you are guaranteed to see those positive returns if you just wait it out long enough. And while for the US markets that is true to this point, yes, we are higher than we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were higher than we were 10 years prior, and so on and so forth. That's not necessarily true. That's not a strict economic rule. For instance, the Nikkei, the Japanese index, is lower than it was decades ago. It is. It reached its peak back in 1989. The peak then was 37,000. It's not even at 30,000 now. We're not guaranteed. Again, there are very few things in life that are guaranteed. Death and taxes. It's about it. Gains in the market are not. The stock market is not guaranteed to go up. And I actually did address this a couple of weeks ago where I said, if we can assume historically, based on the American markets, they go up. Why can't we make equal and opposite assumptions that because historically there are indicators of when a correct time to invest in, i.e. macro timing of the markets, that is appropriate too? And then everyone starts yelling incomprehensibly. Fine. Again, you're sitting and saying, that's the Japanese markets. It would never happen in American markets. I pray to God it doesn't. At minimum, what we do know historically is that after prolonged periods of growth, after decades of expansion, meaning individual decades, the following decade usually has much slower growth. For instance, the 20s, roaring growth, 30s, not so much. This repeated several times in the 20th century, and it's being assumed, given the historical pattern, that much the same will happen in this decade. That the 2010s had massive growth. The 2020s will be a slow, bumpy, recessionary-filled cycle. Now, I apologize if the lighting got bad a few minutes ago. It's welcome to Florida. It started raining, so the clouds came in, shut out the sun. Thank the Lord for ring lights. Now, back to the point I was making here. Historically, again, looking at market returns, we can assume that this decade will not be good. However, let me throw a little monkey wrench into the American markets being strong right now. There's a thing called the M2 money supply. It's what the Federal Reserve tracks. I'm going to simplify it for you. The M2 money supply is a combination of currency and immediate liquid assets, demand deposits, savings accounts, liquid assets, essentially. As of January of 2020, so before the pandemic hit, the overall M2 money supply was $15.4 trillion. So again, that is dollars in circulation. That is the amount of savings you have in immediate savings accounts, money markets, whatever it is. Actually, I apologize. The exact equation actually eliminates IRAs, money markets, key off balances, and all the other fun things. It's literally just savings deposits and money, demand deposits, things like that. We were at $15.4 trillion in January of 2020. As of January of 2022, we were at 21.6 trillion dollars. I repeat, from January 2020 of about 15.4, January of 22, 21.6, 40% of all of the money that exists in America today was printed or came into existence, let's call it, within the last 2 years. I don't know if you see the problem here. I do. I'd admittedly a little concerned by that. Yeah, that a country that has existed for, I'm going to round, say 250 years, has 40% of its overall money come into existence in the last 2 years. It's mildly disconcerting. I also have a broader question about how it is possible that the money supply went up 40% without inflation and or sales of assets also increasing 40%, just to kind of maintain some semblance of balance. Yeah, I might be missing something here, but I am shocked after learning this that the inflation rate in America never hit 10%. Because again, even if we assume that this takes into account more than just overall dollar bills that have been printed in the last 2 years, this also includes savings accounts. The only way that I can really imagine we also got trillions in savings is people liquidating assets that were held in IRAs, key-off plans, whatever it was. Meaning that they pulled money out of the market, which also means hypothetically there should be less money in the market, which by proxy should mean that the market should be significantly lower than it was 2 years ago. Again, I might be missing something here, but this math does not make sense to me. if someone would like to clue me in, leave a comment, shoot me an email, message me on LinkedIn, I would be more than happy to have this discussion because I am confused. But the point I'm making here is that you assume a lot of things about the markets, the economy. Don't be making those assumptions. Again, historically, yes, we've avoided having negative sustained growth. We have not avoided stagnated growth. But we've also never printed 40% of the money supply in 2 years. So take that for what it is. You are not guaranteed to see your money go up in value. Now, there's a section here. It's actually page 12 of the paper for those that ever get to reading it, where they discuss returns and risk. And I will avoid using the technical jargon of conditional variances and all the other fun things. But however, what one of the economists pieces of research that is cited actually states that parameter uncertainty, meaning the valuations of stocks, price dividend ratios, price earnings ratios, whatever they are, if we are uncertain about those basic parameters, then annualized stock market risk actually increases with horizon. Essentially, going back to my conversation last week with Dr. Vinay, that if you're just randomly picking a stock or choosing to invest in the market, regardless of whether or not things are fairly priced, your risk is significantly higher than someone who's actually timing it slightly on a macroeconomic sense and paying attention to price to earnings ratios, price to dividend ratio, price to books, whatever, doing the actual financial fundamental research. Your risk is actually higher. And I fully agree with that sentiment. Again, that might not be the consensus pick. Most financial economists, as Professor Choi lays out, will probably still believe that annual stock market risk does decrease with time. In general, yes, because we assume the market goes up. And because we assume that people will either be investing at lows, at highs, in the middle, so it's, again, averaged. But parameter uncertainty, again, investing at the highs of the market, investing below a recession or above a recession, just below the drop-off, that don't seem smart. It never has. So the concept of just investing early and often, regardless of market conditions, also nonsense. Don't do that. See, so much of the financial advice, the personal finance advice that is given in these books, is an attempt to take into account emotions and psychology. However, they usually do that at the detriment of the real world. I think the best way I can put it is that these books focus on your psychological existence. How you function. If you can unlearn old habits, the concept of saving or investing, paying off debt, whatever it is. Whereas economic theory focuses on the real world, sometimes to the detriment of your psychology, of your emotions. Why can't we do both? Why can't we learn from each other? Why can't economists understand the reason that these finance books have so much power is because they relate to the average person. They can communicate with them in a way that they understand that is appealing to them. But also, why can't people who write these personal finance books, I don't know, do better? Like, give better advice, and please, for the love of God, don't be condescending to people you're trying to help. Like, I just don't get that. Why do you have to insult people? When, if I'm being completely honest, the only person I'm seeing here who can't be good at math is probably Dave Ramsey. Because I don't know, I might be missing something. I don't really feel the need, I'm lazy in that sense of the word, to go through all of his personal business filings, but I would assume somewhere along the way in starting his business, he took out a loan. If this man bootstrapped everything, God bless. It's not possible for the average person. It's also not practical because by, again, taking out a loan, that requires that you pay less than you would make off of the investment also kind of helps you do the whole save and invest and retire early thing that all of these books promote. So realistically, if these books actually appreciated a nuanced and educated approach to being financially free, retiring early, and not being burdened by anything economically, they'd probably do a better job, or at least they should do a better job of educating you on how to properly utilize debt in order to make more money so that you can then save and invest more money and then retire early. Just a thought. But again, this kind of goes contrary to so much of their advice. And I will finish off with this last bit. Dr. Joe Fitter, my first guest, also brought up the notion of what your asset allocation in your portfolio should be. That your total asset mix in your portfolio, the total that you have in stocks, should be 100 minus your age. So again, if you're 23, you should have no more than 77% of your portfolio in stocks. A lot of books written on personal finance directly advocate against having 100% of your portfolio in stocks. A significant portion, more than half, advocate for some nature of the 100 minus age rule. And respectfully, that's nonsense. Going back to the whole point of your consumption being smoothed, as we talked about earlier, why should there be a negative correlation between equity investing and age? Again, if we understand that your middle years, your middle age of working are your most profitable, why shouldn't that also be a hump-shaped distribution? Or early on in life, where you need money immediately. It's not invested, it's put towards paying the bills. But as you get to a point where you can afford to save and invest more, you put more money into the stock market. That makes sense. That as you are in your middle age, as you are making more money, you can afford to take on more risk than someone who is 20 and is not making enough money to even consider losing anything. Again, we go back to practical existence, not theoretical existence. If, realistically, you have the ability to invest more because you have now been in the workforce for longer, which means that you can save, invest more. Again, we did this 30, 40 minutes ago. That also means that you have the ability to invest more in equities. And that, by my calculations, you should invest more in equities. That in your middle age, your investment in equities should be highest. And full disclosure, I don't see an issue with putting 100% of your portfolio in stocks, in equities. I really don't. To use these personal finance books and their advice against themselves, if the markets are guaranteed to go up, why the hell not? Come on, guys. The longer I hold it in the market, the more I'm guaranteed to see it appreciate in value, so why not? 38-year-old me putting 100% of my portfolio into the market, why not? I'm not going to touch it for 20 years. Who do I care? I mean, that makes sense to me logically. It follows from the argument that's being made here. If I'm guaranteed to see appreciation in my investment, does it really matter about diversifying risk? I'm confused here. You can't simultaneously be advocating for investing early and often because you're guaranteed to see appreciation value over a long-term horizon, but simultaneously be worried about being too risky in what your portfolio allocation is. That makes no sense to me. That's hypocrisy. That's nonsense. Pick one. I personally am of the opinion that yes, markets, the American markets, will go up over a long period of time. Historically, that has been true. However, as has been made very clear in this entire podcast, not just this episode, but the entire podcast as a whole, I also believe in picking your appropriate moments to invest. I think that's the correct thing to do. And third, I believe that having everything in Equities, once you're finally investing in the market, it's totally fine. As I have brought up with multiple guests, this nonsense of if you need it within the next 5 years, don't invest in the market. Nah. If I can make 3%, whatever, in the next 4 months, I'll take it. The average savings rate in America, again, it's higher for online banks, but most recently, the average savings rate that you'll get at a bank is 0.13%, according to bankrate.com. Yeah, why not? If I can get 2 or 3% sitting in the market for a couple of months, I'll do it. Absolutely. Nonsense. If you can be in the market, if you can afford to be in the market, be in the market. Put everything into equities. I really don't see the issue here. But again, this goes back to the concept of knowing when to put things in the market, but also the realistic understanding that you might not be able to right now, and you might not be able to for a couple of years, and that's fine. It's something to be shamed for. But what that does mean is that realistically, a lot of these books are just out of left field. They're probably not telling you things that are best for you. These self-help books might be a good introduction to the world of personal finance, but they should never be your last step. You should continue to expand and grow your knowledge base from them. Because, as I've said, and this will be my final conclusion on it, a lot of the advice they give is flat out wrong. It's negligent, it's fallacious in nature. It's not good advice. It's not practical. It sounds good in theory. But again, the world isn't theoretical. We live in the real world where people are struggling to pay for rent, to pay for food. They're concerned about the economy. That's why consumer confidence again hit near record lows a few months ago. People are concerned. Giving you some nonsense and shaming you into not using credit card debt or putting things on your credit card or going out to a restaurant once a week is arrogant nonsense from people who live in ivory towers and don't know what it's like to be you. I'm not going to do that. Again, this is a finance podcast. I will always, kind of like I did for the past 10 minutes, advise that you invest. I will. I will also advise that you live below your means, that you have a proper budget set up, that you not spend wastefully, hello, luxury goods and items. However, I will also recommend that you live life, that you have those experiences, that you make memories. Respectfully, $1 million when you're 60 doesn't mean much. You can pass it on to your kids or your kids' kids. Great, but it doesn't do you any good. So unless your goal is some altruistic, multi-generational 4D chess, I'm not seeing it. Respectfully, all the dudes who are thinking they're going to retire, at 55, a decade ahead of schedule, travel the world and do all the fun things. I don't know if y'all know this. Father Time is undefeated. Yeah, so if you're waiting until 55 to finally do that axe throwing and top golf that your friends wanted to do with you now, I guarantee you're probably not going to enjoy that as much as you would now. I don't know if you've ever talked to someone who's in their 50s or 60s. They generally feel worse physically than someone in their early 20s. I might be wrong. Might need to have more conversations with people, but I don't think so. Plus, again, real talk. You take a trip that you can't physically do much on. Fine, you have those memories for a couple of years. You might be able to share them with your grandkids. Fine. But why not make those memories sooner? Take that trip in your early 30s, your late 20s, so that then you can share it with your spouse and your kids and then your grandkids. Why not live life while still living a financially smart life? That is the goal here, not to shame you, but to help you wise up. Now, that is all that I have for today. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, if this is your first time here, wherever you are seeing this, whether it's on YouTube, whether you're listening to us on any of the podcasting platforms that we have this live, I appreciate you. Please, if you have not yet, subscribe to the channel, follow it, like it, share it with friends. We can help everyone wise up and hopefully not get caught being weirdly insulted by Dave Ramsey. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I will talk to you all on Monday. Enjoy your weekends.